The woman paying for this disaster. That was what my seat card said at my granddaughter's wedding. Not grandmother of the bride. Not Evelyn Parker. Just those 6 words printed in elegant gold script and placed carefully beside a crystal champagne glass worth more than the monthly electric bill Richard and I used to worry about when we were first married. I stood there for a moment staring at the card while laughter and violin music floated through the ballroom around me. No one noticed the expression on my face. Or maybe they did and simply chose not to care. Claire had chosen the Grand Regency Hotel downtown for the reception. One of those places with marble floors so polished you could see your reflection in them and chandeliers hanging from ceilings 20 feet high. The kind of place where everyone smiles too much and speaks softly enough to sound important. I adjusted the sleeve of my navy blue dress and slowly sat down at the table tucked near the back corner of the ballroom beside 2 distant relatives I barely recognized. From there, I had a perfect view of the sweetheart table where Sophie and her new husband were laughing beneath a wall of white roses that I had paid for. Every arrangement in that room had been paid for by me. The flowers, the orchestra, the custom wedding invitations Claire insisted had to be imported from Italy because local printing looked cheap. Even the open bar that was already attracting a crowd before dinner had been covered by my checkbook. Claire liked to call the wedding a family effort, but everyone knew what that really meant. My late husband Richard used to tell me I had a hard time saying no to family. Maybe he was right, especially when it came to Sophie. My granddaughter had been the bright spot of my life since the day she was born 30 years ago during a thunderstorm that knocked the power out across half the county. Richard and I drove through pouring rain just to reach the hospital in time. I still remembered holding that tiny pink bundle while Michael stood beside me looking terrified and proud all at once. Back then, my son still looked at me with warmth in his eyes. That was before Claire entered the picture. Before every family gathering started feeling like a performance where I had somehow become an unwanted extra. "Mrs. Parker?" a young server asked nervously beside me. "Would you like champagne?" I smiled politely and shook my head. "Just water, sweetheart." He nodded quickly and hurried away. Across the ballroom, I spotted Claire moving from table to table in a silver gown that shimmered every time she turned beneath the lights. She looked elegant, controlled, perfect. The kind of woman magazines love to feature under headlines about successful modern families. She laughed lightly as guests complimented the wedding, accepting praise like she had personally built the ballroom with her bare hands. Then her eyes met mine from across the room, only for a second, but long enough for me to see the satisfaction there. She knew I had seen the card, and she knew I would never cause a scene at Sophie's wedding. That was the thing about Claire. She understood exactly how far she could push someone while still looking innocent to everyone else. "Can you believe Evelyn covered almost the entire wedding?" I overheard one woman whisper behind me. "Must be nice having family money." Another voice chuckled softly. "Well, judging by that seat card, at least they're honest about it." Heat crept into my chest, but I kept my expression calm. I reached down and folded the card carefully before slipping it into my purse beside my lipstick and reading glasses. My hand stayed perfectly steady. Years ago, I might have cried in a restroom stall or confronted Michael in tears. But age teaches you something important. The people who humiliate you in public are often hoping you'll lose control first. I glanced toward the dance floor where Sophie was smiling for photographs while Claire adjusted the train of her dress for the cameras. Everyone looked beautiful beneath the golden lights. Everyone looked happy. But for the first time that evening, sitting alone at that back table, I realized something cold and undeniable. That card had not been a joke. It had been a message. Dinner was served nearly an hour later beneath the soft glow of chandeliers and flickering candles, arranged down the center of each table. The ballroom smelled faintly of roses, expensive perfume, and butter from the filet mignon the servers carried carefully between guests. I barely touched my food. My appetite had disappeared sometime between seeing that place card and watching Claire pose for photographs beside the wedding cake I had paid $12,000 for. The cake stood nearly 6 feet tall, decorated with hand-painted sugar flowers that Sophie had insisted were necessary because she had seen something similar on social media months earlier. I remembered Claire calling me late one evening after the bakery consultation. "It is Sophie's special day, Evelyn," she had said in that smooth, patient tone she used whenever she wanted something expensive. "You want her wedding to feel unforgettable, do you not?" I had written the check the next morning. Looking around the ballroom now, I realized nearly every beautiful thing surrounding us had started with a phone call like that. Over the past year, there had always been one more emergency expense. The orchestra from Chicago because local musicians sounded cheap. The imported champagne because Claire said guests would notice the difference. The honeymoon suite overlooking the Pacific Ocean because Sophie deserved at least one perfect week before real life begins. Every request came wrapped in guilt and family obligation until eventually I stopped questioning any of it. Richard used to joke that I treated my checkbook like a love language. At the time, I laughed with him. Now I wondered if he had been trying to warn me. Across the room, Michael stood near the bar laughing with two men from his office, while Claire floated gracefully between guests accepting compliments. My son looked older these days, more tired. The silver at his temples had spread quickly after Richard passed away 3 years ago. But what unsettled me most was not how much Michael had changed physically. It was the way he avoided looking directly at me now, as though eye contact might force him to acknowledge something uncomfortable. There was a time when Michael called me every Sunday morning without fail. We used to spend hours talking about everything from baseball scores to neighborhood gossip. After Claire entered our lives, those calls slowly disappeared. First they became shorter, then occasional. Eventually they turned into polite holiday conversations that felt more like obligations than affection. "Evelyn, does everything taste all right?" Claire appeared beside my chair so suddenly that I almost startled. Up close, her smile looked flawless. Her makeup untouched despite hours of greeting guests beneath hot ballroom lights. "Everything is lovely," I answered quietly. "You must be exhausted." "Oh, I barely notice anymore," she said with a soft laugh. "Planning a wedding at this level takes serious work." At this level, I noticed the subtle emphasis immediately. Claire had always loved reminding people how refined her standards were. Her eyes drifted briefly toward the head table before lowering again. "Sophie wanted tonight to feel elegant. I told her elegance comes with a price." Her hand rested lightly against the back of my chair. To anyone watching, the gesture probably looked affectionate, supportive even, but there was something cold hidden beneath it. "Well," I replied carefully, "I suppose she got exactly what she wanted." Claire's smile widened slightly. "Yes, thanks to you." Then she walked away before I could answer. I watched her disappear into the crowd while the band shifted into a slow jazz number Richard used to love. For a moment, memory hit me so sharply that my chest tightened. Richard dancing with me in our kitchen on Sunday mornings. Richard balancing bills at the dining room table while telling me not to worry because family always takes care of each other. Richard warning me quietly one evening after Claire criticized a waitress at dinner. "That woman knows exactly how to make people feel small," he had said after Claire left the room. At the time, I defended her. I told him she was stressed, misunderstood, young. Sitting alone at that crowded wedding reception years later, I finally understood something painful. Richard had seen the truth long before I did. The reception grew louder as the night went on. Champagne loosened conversations, and the dance floor slowly filled beneath the amber lights while photographers moved through the ballroom, capturing carefully staged happiness from every angle. I remained at my table near the back wall, quietly watching the family I no longer recognized. At one point, the band announced a slideshow presentation prepared by Claire. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly as a large screen descended beside the dance floor. Guests turned toward it with soft smiles and polite applause. Baby pictures of Sophie appeared first, then family vacations, birthday parties, Christmas mornings beside fireplaces and perfectly decorated trees. The images shifted one after another in warm golden tones, while sentimental music played softly through the speakers. I noticed something almost immediately. I was barely in any of them. In photographs where I should have been standing beside Sophie, someone had carefully cropped the frame tighter. In others, Claire positioned herself directly beside my granddaughter, while Michael stood smiling nearby, like a man grateful to belong somewhere. Richard appeared twice in the entire presentation despite being the grandfather who paid for Sophie's private school tuition for nearly 10 years. I sat perfectly still while guests around me dabbed at their eyes and complimented the beautiful tribute to family. Family. The word felt strange now. "Do you mind if I sit here?" a quiet voice asked beside me. I looked up to find Sophie holding the edge of her wedding gown carefully as she lowered herself into the empty chair next to mine. Up close, she looked exhausted beneath the makeup and hairspray. Beautiful, but tired in the way brides often are after spending an entire day performing happiness for hundreds of people. Of course not, I answered softly. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Sophie watched the slideshow continue across the ballroom, while guests laughed warmly at childhood pictures flashing overhead. "Thank you for everything, Grandma," she finally whispered. "Tonight would not have happened without you." I studied her carefully. Sophie still had the same blue eyes Michael had as a child. Richard used to say they looked honest even when they were sad. "You are. Welcome, sweetheart," I said. "Did you like the flowers?" A small smile touched her lips. "They are beautiful." Then the smile faded almost immediately. Claire handled most of the planning. She said you preferred staying out of stressful details. I felt something tighten quietly inside my chest. "Is that what she told you?" Sophie hesitated before nodding slowly. "She said weddings overwhelm you now. That too much involvement would exhaust you." I looked down at my folded napkin. For several seconds, I simply listened to the muffled music and distant laughter around us. Another small cruelty. Another carefully planted idea. Not direct enough to sound malicious. Just enough to slowly erase me from the picture while pretending it was for my own comfort. Before I could answer, a sharply dressed woman carrying a clipboard approached our table. "There you are, Sophie," she said breathlessly. "Claire has been looking everywhere for you. We still need family photos in the West Ballroom." Sophie stood quickly. "I should go." The wedding planner glanced toward me politely. "Claire asked us earlier to avoid pulling you into too many activities, Mrs. Parker. She said large gatherings tire you easily." Her tone remained professional and kind, which somehow made the words sting even more. I smiled gently anyway. That was thoughtful of her. The planner nodded and hurried Sophie away toward the photographers waiting beneath towering arrangements of white orchids. I watched my granddaughter disappear into the crowd while the slideshow behind them shifted to another smiling family portrait where I was missing completely. Around me, crystal glasses clinked softly. Waiters carried silver trays through the ballroom. Someone near the dance floor laughed loudly enough to echo against the marble walls. Yet despite all the noise, one truth settled over me with terrible clarity. Claire had not merely pushed me aside tonight. She had been quietly rewriting my place in this family for years. By the time the cake was served, the ballroom had settled into that polished late-evening atmosphere where people loosen ties, women slip off uncomfortable shoes beneath the table, and conversations grow louder from expensive wine. I excused myself quietly and walked toward the hallway leading to the restrooms, mostly because I needed a few minutes away from the music and smiling faces. The corridor outside the ballroom was dimmer and cooler, lined with framed black and white photographs of old city landmarks. My heels clicked softly against the marble floor as I moved slowly past a row of decorative mirrors. I had almost reached the restroom when I heard Claire's voice drifting from a partially open lounge near the corner. Honestly, without Evelyn's money, none of this would have happened. Her tone carried the relaxed confidence of someone certain she would never be overheard. I stopped walking before I even realized I had done it. Inside the lounge, soft laughter followed her words. "Then why keep her at the wedding?" another woman asked. "Because appearances matter," Claire replied lightly. "Michael would never forgive me if I completely excluded her." More laughter. I stood very still beside the hallway wall while the sound of ice clinking against glasses drifted through the doorway. "She loves feeling needed anyway," Claire continued. "That generation always thinks writing checks makes them important." Still, another voice said carefully, "The seat card thing was a little harsh." Claire laughed again, quieter this time. "Please. Evelyn acts sweet, but she loves control. Richard spoiled her for decades, and now she expects everyone to worship her because she pays for things." My fingers tightened slightly around my purse strap. Richard's name sounded strange coming from Claire's mouth. Too casual. Too dismissive. "Michael says she barely notices half the things around her now anyway," Claire added. "She is old money. That is all she is good for." Silence followed for a brief second before someone changed the subject to honeymoon plans and beachfront resorts in Maui. I stepped backward carefully before anyone could see me standing there. My heartbeat remained calm, almost unnervingly calm, as I walked toward the restroom at the end of the hall. Years ago, words like those would have shattered me, but standing beneath the soft yellow lights of that hotel corridor, I felt something colder than sadness settle quietly into place. Clarity. Inside the restroom, I stood alone at the marble sink staring at my reflection in the mirror. My silver hair remained perfectly pinned despite the long evening. My lipstick had faded slightly. The navy dress Richard loved still fit me well enough for a 71-year-old widow attending her granddaughter's wedding alone. I looked tired, but I did not look weak. After a moment, the restroom door opened and an older woman stepped inside carrying a clutch purse trimmed in pearls. I recognized her immediately. Diane Whitaker, one of Richard's longtime friends from the country club years ago. Evelyn, she said softly, her expression shifting the moment she saw my face. Are you all right? I smiled automatically. Of course. Diane hesitated before moving closer to lower her voice. Richard worried about Claire, you know. The words caught me off guard enough that I looked up sharply. Diane sighed quietly. About a year before he passed, he mentioned he did not trust the way she handled family matters. He said she was always measuring people by what they could provide. My chest tightened slightly. He never told me that. I think he was trying to protect you, Diane answered gently. Richard loved peace more than conflict. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Water dripped softly from one of the faucets nearby, while distant music pulsed faintly through the walls from the ballroom outside. Then Diane touched my arm lightly. You deserve better than how they treat you, Evelyn. I nodded once, but said nothing. Because the truth was, deep down, I already knew she was right. The painful part was realizing how long I had spent pretending otherwise. I returned to the ballroom a few minutes later with my expression composed and my shoulders straight. The band had shifted into slower music while guests gathered near the dance floor, holding glasses of champagne and slices of towering wedding cake balanced on tiny silver plates. No one looked at me twice as I walked back to my table. That was the strange thing about growing older. You slowly become invisible in rooms where you once mattered most. Claire stood near the center of the ballroom, speaking with several guests from Michael's office. Her hand rested lightly against his arm while she laughed at something one of the men said. From a distance, they looked like the perfect couple. Successful, elegant, untouchable. Michael glanced toward me briefly as I approached my seat, but his eyes shifted away almost immediately. Years ago, my son would have crossed the room to ask if I needed anything. He would have noticed if I disappeared too long. Now there was only distance between us, dressed up as politeness. I lowered myself carefully into my chair and reached for my water glass. The ice had melted completely. Across the table, one of the distant cousins leaned closer with a sympathetic smile. Beautiful wedding, she said softly. Claire certainly knows how to put on a show. I nodded politely. She does. The woman hesitated before lowering her voice further. I hope you do not mind me saying this, Evelyn, but people have noticed how much you contributed tonight. I looked at her quietly. Families help each other. Some families appreciate it more than others, she replied gently. Before I could answer, the microphone near the dance floor crackled softly as Claire stepped onto the small stage beside the band. The ballroom gradually quieted. She tapped the microphone lightly and smiled with effortless confidence. Thank you all for being here tonight, she began warmly. This wedding has truly been a labor of love for our family. Applause followed politely. Claire continued speaking gracefully about Sophie's childhood, about family traditions, about building beautiful memories together. Then she paused dramatically and laughed softly. And of course, none of this would have been possible without a little financial help from certain family members who simply do not know how to say no. Scattered laughter moved through the ballroom. My fingers rested calmly against the folded napkin in my lap. Claire smiled toward my table without using my name directly. But that is what mothers and grandmothers are for, right? More laughter. Michael chuckled quietly beside her. Not loudly, not cruelly, but enough. Enough for something inside me to finally settle into certainty. Claire had spent years humiliating me in ways subtle enough to deny later. Small comments disguised as jokes. Exclusions disguised as concern. Tonight she simply stopped hiding it. Around me, guests exchanged awkward glances while others continued smiling uncertainly into their wine glasses. Sophie stood frozen near the dance floor beside her new husband, her smile visibly strained now. Even from across the room, I could see embarrassment creeping into her expression. Claire finished her speech smoothly and raised her champagne glass. To family, she declared brightly. Crystal glasses lifted around the ballroom. To family, guests echoed back. I raised my own glass slowly, though I did not drink. Because at that exact moment, another memory surfaced with startling clarity. Richard sitting quietly in his study late one evening 2 years before his death. Papers spread neatly across his desk, his reading glasses low on his nose. "If anything ever happens to me," he had said carefully, "promise me you will pay attention to how people treat you once they think I cannot protect you anymore." At the time, I laughed off the comment. Richard had always been cautious about money and family dynamics. I thought he worried too much. Sitting beneath the chandeliers of my granddaughter's wedding while polite laughter echoed around the ballroom, I realized something painful. Richard had not been worried. He had been prepared. And for the first time all evening, I found myself wondering exactly what preparations my husband may have made before he died. The evening finally began, winding down shortly after 10 o'clock. Guests gathered coats from velvet chairs while hotel staff quietly cleared empty champagne glasses and folded linen napkins from the tables. Outside the ballroom windows, rain had started falling softly over the city, turning the streetlights into blurred golden reflections across the pavement below. I remained seated for a few extra minutes after most guests moved toward the lobby. My feet ached from the heels, and my shoulders felt heavy beneath the navy dress I had once been excited to wear. Across the ballroom, Sophie stood embracing relatives while photographers captured final pictures near the staircase wrapped in white roses. Claire still looked flawless somehow, not a single strand of hair out of place. Michael loosened his tie while speaking with the wedding coordinator near the entrance, though he kept glancing toward Claire before answering any questions, as if checking for approval first. That small habit hurt more than I wanted to admit. Richard used to say marriage should make a person more fully themselves, not smaller. Watching my son now, I wondered when exactly he had stopped sounding like his own man. I reached for my purse and slowly stood from the table. As I turned toward the exit, a familiar voice stopped me. "Evelyn." I looked up to see Howard Green approaching from near the lobby hallway. Time had softened him over the years. His dark hair had turned completely silver now, and reading glasses rested low against his nose exactly the way Richard's once had. Howard had been Richard's attorney for over 30 years. More importantly, he had been his closest friend since college. "Howard," I said quietly, genuinely surprised. "I did not know you were here tonight." He offered a small tired smile. "Richard made me promise years ago that I would keep an eye on certain things after he passed." Something in his tone caused my chest to tighten slightly. Howard glanced around the nearly empty ballroom before lowering his voice. "Do you have a moment?" I nodded slowly. He guided me toward a quieter sitting area just outside the ballroom, where leather chairs overlooked the rain-covered city below. For several seconds, Howard simply studied me carefully. "Richard worried this day might eventually come," he said at last. I looked down at my hands resting against my purse. "I think I finally understand that now." Howard sighed softly before reaching inside his suit jacket and removing a sealed cream-colored envelope. My name was written across the front in Richard's handwriting. Seeing those familiar letters nearly took the breath from me. "He asked me to give this to you only if I believed you were being publicly humiliated or financially manipulated by family members after his death," Howard explained carefully. The world around me seemed to grow strangely quiet. I stared at the envelope without opening it. Richard actually used those words? Howard nodded once. He was very specific. Rain tapped softly against the tall windows beside us while distant elevator chimes echoed faintly through the hotel lobby. My fingers trembled slightly as I traced Richard's handwriting across the envelope. "Why would he think something like this would happen?" I whispered. Howard leaned back slowly in his chair. "Because Richard paid attention, Evelyn, more than people realized." I closed my eyes briefly. Memories flooded back all at once. Richard quietly balancing checkbooks at the kitchen table. Richard watching Claire during family dinners with that thoughtful expression he wore whenever something bothered him. Richard insisting on reviewing every financial document personally during the final year of his illness. "There is more inside that envelope than just a letter," Howard continued carefully. Richard updated several estate documents before he passed away, documents connected to the family trust. I looked up sharply. Howard's expression remained calm, but serious. "He wanted protections in place for you." My heartbeat slowed into something strangely steady then. Not panic, not grief. Something colder, clearer. For the first time all evening, I no longer felt confused about what was happening around me. Richard had seen this long before I did. And somehow, sitting beneath the soft lobby lights with rain falling outside and his final envelope resting quietly in my hands, I realized my husband had not left me unprotected after all. The rain continued through the night as I drove home alone along quiet downtown streets, glistening beneath traffic lights and storefront reflections. I kept Richard's envelope resting carefully on the passenger seat beside my purse the entire drive, as though moving it might somehow disturb whatever truth waited inside. By the time I reached my house just after midnight, the wedding music still echoed faintly in my head. The laughter, the speeches, Claire's polished voice floating through the ballroom, while everyone smiled politely around their champagne glasses. I unlocked the front door and stepped into silence. Real silence. Not the artificial quiet of hotel hallways or formal dinners. The familiar kind that settles over a home after decades of ordinary life have passed through it. I slipped off my heels near the entryway and turned on the small lamp beside the living room sofa. Warm yellow light filled the room softly. Richard's favorite armchair still sat beside the fireplace exactly where he used to leave it every evening after dinner. Some nights I still caught myself glancing toward it without thinking. I removed the folded seat card from my purse and placed it carefully on the coffee table beside the sealed envelope. The two objects looked strangely connected there together, one carrying humiliation, the other carrying answers. For several minutes, I simply stood staring at them while rain tapped steadily against the windows. Then finally, I sat down and opened Richard's envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter folded neatly beside several official documents stamped with legal seals and signatures. My throat tightened the moment I recognized Richard's handwriting. Evelyn, if you are reading this, then I was right to worry. I paused immediately, pressing my fingers lightly against the paper before continuing. Richard's words felt steady and familiar, almost as though he were sitting across from me speaking softly over morning coffee the way he used to every Sunday. I know you will try to excuse people. You always do. That is one of the reasons I loved you from the moment we met. But kindness without boundaries invites cruelty from the wrong people. I swallowed hard and continued reading beneath the soft lamplight. Over the past several years, I have watched certain members of our family grow comfortable treating your generosity like an obligation instead of a gift. Especially Claire. If matters ever reached the point where you were publicly humiliated, manipulated financially, or intentionally isolated within the family, I wanted safeguards already in place before I was gone. My eyes shifted toward the legal documents beneath the letter. One phrase immediately stood out in bold type. Family Trust Protection Clause. My heartbeat slowed as I continued reading. Richard had amended the family trust 18 months before his death. According to the revised terms, any direct beneficiary found to have publicly degraded, exploited, or intentionally manipulated me for financial benefit could lose partial or complete access to their inheritance. The determination would not be emotional or arbitrary. It would be reviewed through documented evidence by the estate attorney and trustee. I sat frozen on the sofa staring at the papers while the rain continued outside. Richard had thought of everything. The seat card, Claire's public speech, witnesses, the financial records tied to the wedding itself. None of it was meaningless anymore. Beneath the legal documents rested one final handwritten page from Richard. I know this may hurt you deeply, but I need you to understand something, Evelyn. Love should never require humiliation as proof of loyalty. I closed my eyes for several seconds. The room felt impossibly quiet around me. Then another realization slowly settled in. Claire and Michael believed the wedding had proven their control over me. They thought I would continue writing checks no matter how little respect they showed in return. They believed age had made me easier to dismiss, easier to manage. But sitting alone in the living room Richard and I built together over 42 years, I finally understood the truth. Richard had not left me powerless. He had simply waited for me to see clearly enough to stop protecting people who had never protected me in return. The next morning, sunlight filtered softly through the kitchen curtains while I sat alone at the breakfast table, holding a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn, leaving the neighborhood quiet and washed clean outside my windows. Richard's documents still rested neatly beside me on the table along with the folded seat card from the wedding. I had barely slept. Not because I was angry anymore. Anger requires surprise. And sometime during the long silent hours of the night, Surprise had finally left me. Around 9 o'clock, my phone began buzzing with messages. First, Sophie thanking me again for the wedding. Then several relatives complimenting the beautiful reception and photographs already appearing online. Claire had apparently uploaded dozens before sunrise. Every picture looked perfect. Smiling faces, crystal chandeliers, expensive flowers glowing beneath golden lighting. Not a single image showed the seat card tucked now beside my coffee cup. Around 10:15, Michael called. I stared at his name on the screen for several seconds before answering. "Morning, Mom," he said, sounding distracted. "You made it home all right last night?" "I did." "Good. Good." Papers shuffled faintly on his end of the line. "Claire and I are heading to brunch with Sophie and her husband in about an hour. You should come." His tone sounded casual, automatic. The same tone people use when offering invitations they do not truly expect you to accept. "That is thoughtful," I answered calmly. "But I think I will stay home today." A pause followed. "All right, maybe next weekend then." Then came the part that finally made everything clear. "Oh, and Mom," Michael added carefully. "Claire wanted me to mention we are starting to think about future family investments now that the wedding is finished. Maybe a small beach property everyone could share someday." Everyone. I looked down at Richard's trust documents resting beside my untouched coffee. "I see," I said quietly. Michael continued speaking, growing more relaxed now. "You know Sophie and Brandon eventually want children, and property values near the coast are only going up. Claire thought it would make sense for the family to start planning early while everyone is in a strong financial position." Strong financial position. Such polished language for asking someone else to keep paying. I listened silently while my son explained ideas Claire had clearly rehearsed with him beforehand. Vacation properties, investment opportunities, expanding the family portfolio. Not once did he ask how I felt after the wedding. Not once did he mention the speech, or the seat card, or the way I had been quietly pushed aside all evening long. Finally, when he paused to take a breath, I spoke softly. "Michael." "Yeah." "Do you know what Richard's trust says about public humiliation?" Silence. Complete silence. For several seconds, all I could hear was faint restaurant noise in the background where he must have already been meeting the others. "What do you mean?" he asked slowly. I traced my finger lightly across Richard's handwriting on the legal papers beside me. "Your father updated several estate protections before he died." Another long pause followed. This one felt different. Uneasy. "Mom," Michael said carefully, "I do not know what Claire did now, but if this is about the wedding jokes, people were only trying to have fun." Fun. I looked toward the living room where Richard's armchair sat quietly beside the fireplace. "Your father did not consider humiliation funny," I replied. His voice tightened immediately. "What exactly are you talking about?" But I noticed something important then. He did not ask whether I had been hurt. He asked what his father had written. Not long after we ended the call, another message appeared on my phone. This one from Claire herself. "Hope you are not feeling emotional after yesterday. Weddings can overwhelm people sometimes." I stared at the screen for several moments before placing the phone face down beside my coffee cup. Then, very calmly, I reached for Howard Green's business card and picked up the telephone. 3 days later, the family gathered again inside Howard Green's downtown office overlooking the riverfront. The conference room smelled faintly of leather, coffee, and old paper. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the gray afternoon sky, while traffic moved slowly below through rain-soaked streets. Claire arrived first wearing a cream-colored blazer and carrying an expensive handbag large enough to suggest confidence before she even spoke. Michael followed closely behind her, his jaw tense beneath the exhaustion he could no longer fully hide. Sophie entered last beside her new husband, quieter than usual, avoiding direct eye contact with anyone in the room. I sat near the far end of the conference table with Richards, envelope resting calmly in front of me. Howard adjusted several folders before finally speaking. "Thank you all for coming." Claire crossed one leg smoothly over the other. "I still think this entire meeting is unnecessary," she said lightly. "If someone misunderstood a joke at the wedding, I am sure we can handle it privately." Howard did not react. He simply opened one of the folders and slid several documents across the polished table. Approximately 18 months before his death, Richard Parker amended the family trust under a protection clause designed specifically to address financial exploitation and public humiliation directed toward Evelyn Parker. The room went completely still. Michael leaned forward immediately. What exactly does that mean? Howard folded his hands carefully. It means your father anticipated the possibility that Evelyn's financial generosity might eventually be abused or weaponized against her. Claire let out a short, nervous laugh. That sounds incredibly dramatic. Howard finally looked directly at her. Richard was not known for being dramatic. Silence settled heavily across the room. Howard continued calmly. Under the amended trust provisions, any primary beneficiary shown to have publicly degraded, manipulated, or financially exploited Evelyn Parker may forfeit partial or full inheritance rights. Sophie's face visibly paled. Michael looked stunned, but Claire recovered quickly. Surely there would need to be actual evidence of something serious, she replied carefully. Howard nodded once. There is. He opened another folder containing printed photographs from the wedding reception, the seat card, the speech transcript, witness statements from guests present during several public remarks, copies of financial transfers connected to the wedding expenses. Claire's expression shifted for the first time since entering the office. Only slightly, but enough. Michael stared down at the photographs in disbelief. Claire, he whispered, what is this? It was a joke, she snapped quietly. Everyone jokes at weddings. Howard remained calm. Richard's legal wording was intentionally specific. Public humiliation tied to financial dependency qualifies under the clause regardless of whether the offending party later describes it as humor. Sophie suddenly covered her mouth with one trembling hand. Grandma, she whispered softly toward me. I did not know about the card. I looked at her gently. I believe you. Claire turned sharply toward her. Sophie, do not start acting ridiculous now. But Sophie's eyes had already filled with tears. Mom, it was cruel. Claire's composure cracked visibly then. Cruel? After everything I did to make your wedding perfect. Michael rubbed both hands slowly across his face before looking toward me for the first time since entering the office. Mom, he said hoarsely, why did you not say something sooner? I studied my son quietly for several seconds, because I wanted to see whether any of you would notice on your own. No one spoke after that. Rain streaked softly down the tall office windows while the weight of silence settled across the conference table. Howard finally closed the final folder. Effective immediately, Richard Parker's revised trust conditions are now active pending final review. Claire's face had gone completely pale. Michael looked physically ill. Sophie quietly wiped tears from beneath her eyes. And somehow, sitting there beneath the gray afternoon light with Richard's documents spread across the table exactly as he intended, I did not feel victorious at all. Only clear. Clear enough to finally understand the difference between being valued and simply being useful.